Good evening, members. Welcome to the meeting of the Democracy Committee this evening. Before I get to the agenda, may I take the opportunity to advise you that we are not expecting the fire alarm to sound, and if it does, please remain seated, and Mrs Matthews, to my right and your left, will assess the situation and give further instructions on the evacuation of the building if appropriate. Today's proceedings will be webcast by the Council, but if anyone else is intending to record these proceedings, can you please let me know now? I ask this question not to stop you, but merely to ensure that members and other members of the public in the room, not that we have any, know that this is taking place. I'm glad no one else is recording, which is great. We'll move on to the agenda. Agenda item 1, apologies for absence. Mrs Matthews.
We've had apologies from Councillors Revel, Newton and Mrs Ring.
Thank you very much. Notification of substitute members. Councillor Prendergast.
Prendergast for Revel.
Councillor Blackmore for Councillor Mrs Ring.
Councillor Ells for Councillor Newton.
Thank you all. Item 3, notification of visiting members. I can't see any, which is good. Agenda item 4, disclosures by members and officers. Does anyone have any disclosures to make? No? Fantastic. Item 5, disclosures of lobbying. Anyone been lobbied on anything? No? Perfect. Item 6, to consider whether any item should be taken in private because of the possible disclosure of exempt information. As there are no yellow pages, are members happy that all items be taken in public? Is that agreed? Fantastic. Agenda item 7 is the minutes of the meeting held on the 8th of February 2017. These are at page 1 on the agendas in front of you. I'll just take them one at a time, if that's okay, and just indicate if there's anything you wish to query. We'll start with page 1, page 2, page 3. I've got a question on page 3, Angela, if you don't mind, just with regards to the circulation of the contract between Maidstone Council and Public Eye. I don't think I've seen it, but just assure us that that will be circulated in due course. That's all right.
Yes, sorry, I will make sure that's circulated to you. Apologies.
Super. And page 4. Super. They can be agreed. Just on page 4, I noticed it was resolved that members be asked their opinions with regard to receiving agendas here. I think provided that happens by the end of the municipal year, if I can say it, that'd be satisfactory. So we can start as people want in May. Members happy with that? Fantastic. We'll move on to agenda item 8, which is the report of the Head of Legal Partnership and Monitoring Officer amendments to the Constitution. Donna Price is presenting, so I'll hand over to her.
Thank you. There aren't many amendments that we're suggesting at this stage. There have been some amendments in year that have been done. There were decisions made at Council regarding the introduction of electronic voting, so that's been included within the Constitution, and the changes that were agreed at full Council to the Mayoralty. So they've been included, and there's been some restructuring to the Constitution around officer delegations where there's been restructuring in the Council, so it's just moving delegations from one head of service to another. So they're not incorporated within this report because they're done under delegated powers of the monitoring officer. So the only changes that have been suggested are at paragraphs 2.4, 2.5 and 2.6 of the report. There are additional delegations to the Head of Regeneration and Economic Development and the Head of Housing and Community Services. There's a slight change to the Heritage, Culture and Leisure Committee functions and responsibilities, and that's appended to the report. And the last point is the 6-month rule, which was in the Constitution before. It was meant to be kept within the Constitution. I don't think there was any agreement for it to be removed, but it just got missed on the redraft. So it's just reinserting that 6-month rule, which is in the model constitutions, back into the Maidstone Constitution.
Thank you, Mrs Price. Councillor Mrs Blackmore.
Just one question about the motions coming back after 6 months, and it mentions at least a third of the whole number of the council. I don't remember that in the previous constitution. Is that exactly the same language, or has it been amended in any way? And if so, why? I'm sorry, page 7, paragraph 3, and also paragraph 4, where there's the reference to a notice of motion is signed by at least 1/3 of the whole number of the council. And then it's mentioned in the motion similar to one previously rejected.
It's wording from the model constitution that I've used, but I can double check previous versions of the Maidstone constitution. Sorry.
Okay, when you say the model constitution, not sure what you mean. Is that the one that we worked from when it was all redrafted? Because my concern is, if this is to follow the format from the previous constitution, which I think is what we're trying to do, I just want to make sure there aren't any funny little bits being added in.
I can only apologise. I don't have the previous constitution, so I can double check that following this meeting. This is from the sort of, so it's not from, there was a model constitution created some time ago that for all councils, and that was the wording that I've lifted from there. But I can, if you want it to reflect exactly what was before, then that can be, sorry.
I have to say my preference would be to have the language we had before, because without knowing whether this is different or not, I have to say I'm unable to agree this evening. Because just because it was in the model constitution doesn't necessarily mean that's right for Maidstone.
So if we could amend the recommendation to say, as per the previous constitution.
That being on recommendation 3 on page 5, if that's okay. Councillor Joy.
I'm a little bit sorry, only because without knowing what the other words were, are we agreeing something we don't actually know? Yeah, but it might be changed for a reason. Just a question.
It's pretty difficult, to be honest, Councillor Joy. You're right in that we don't have it in front of us. I certainly don't know what was in the Constitution before 2015. I wasn't here before 2015. So I've got no idea off the top of my head, to be honest, from that point of view, which does leave us in a bit of a difficult situation. Councillor Vizard, do you want to come in on this point?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Can we not get the officers to check the Constitution and the wording of it and circulate it, to which we could agree it?
We'll still have to agree it formally at the next meeting, unless we were to give delegated powers, but I don't think there's an appetite around the room for that, just from looking at body language, in all honesty. Does anyone, before we look towards the recommendations, does anyone have any other points to make on the report in front of us? Or not? Okay, in that case, members, I think we've got a choice here. We can either agree what's in front of us with the amendments on to the third recommendation to put in the words as per the previous constitution. Alternatively, we can defer this, I think, to come back to the next committee to ask for the wording of the model constitution and also what was in the previous constitution for us to then make our decision based on having those full facts in front of us, and that would come back to the next meeting of this committee, and that would be a formal deferral of that particular point. Are members happy, or Councillor Blackmore?
I'm happy to move amendment 2.3, recommendation 3 on page 5. To amend the wording to say to consider and agree the reinstatement of the 6-month rule as per the previous constitution, because it worked for years, and it just strikes me that at least 1/3 of the whole number of the council members, that's a huge number.
seconded by Councillor Prendergast there, so we do have a proposal on the table. Does anyone else have any points to make? If not, I'll go straight to a vote. In that case. Do you want to come in, Councillor Joy, before we go to a vote?
Just to say that I think we should wait so that we've got the two before we make a decision. So if that's the recommendation, then I'll put that forward as well. But do we not have to vote on that one first?
Yeah, we'll vote on the proposal by Councillor Blackmore, seconded by Councillor Prendergast, unless, of course, anyone wishes to amend that, in which case we would vote on the amendment. No, we can't. That's an amendment. That's an amendment. I've been corrected by people who know more than me. Quick, Councillor Blackmore.
I'm sorry, I feel this is a bit like an auction. If we actually move to page 8 under 5.1, any amendments that we make tonight have to go to full council on the 12th of April in order to be effective from the 20th of May. So there isn't really the opportunity to defer the item. So I actually think the decision has to be made tonight.
The Constitution would go to the April meeting, but there's no reason that you can't make amendments in year that would then go back to full council on another date.
So, in effect, if we were to defer it tonight, and we would miss the deadline for the council meeting in April, it would go to the council meeting after that, which is May, I think, or July. And basically, everything is deferred beyond that. Councillor Prendergast.
Thank you. Chairman, I don't see what the issue is, because what we're agreeing tonight is just to reinstate what was left out, which is exactly what Councillor Blackmore is proposing, and I've seconded. So I don't see why this should come back to the committee if we reinstate what was in there previously that's been omitted. It's a non-issue, really. Thank you.
No. All right. Thank you very much. In that case, I'll go straight to a vote on the amendment by Councillor Blackmore, seconded by Councillor Prendergast, which is the papers in front of us. But the third point is changed to consider and agree to reinstatement of the 6-month rule as per the previous constitution. Can I have a show of hands of those in favour of the amendment from Councillor Blackmore, please? That's 7. And those against? 2. That is agreed. Thank you very much, members. We've now got to vote on this substantive motion. I'm short. I do apologise. So, the substantive motion, which is the amendment, including the amendment by Councillor Blackmore. All those in favour, please. I won't read it out again. Yeah. Okay, that's 7. Those against? 2. That is all the votes we have to take on this particular agenda item. We'll move on to item 9 then, members, which is the... Oh, Councillor Blackmore, sorry.
Sorry, Chairman. Have we actually done 1, 2 and 4? Or are we doing them separately? So we did them all together, including that change? Yes, OK, just wanted to check.
On the basis that 1, 2 and 4 had no changes in your amendments.
Clarify then that I agree with the others, it's just that one that I was voting against. Have you got that? Yeah? Just the 1 point. The others I agree with.
In that case, we'll have to take them separately, but what we can do is group 1, 2 and 4 together. So, in that case, we'll have to have another vote. This is a vote to agree 1, 2 and 4 as on the papers in front of us. All those in favour? Right, that's unanimous. Thank you very much. We will now move on to agenda item 9, which is the report of the Head of Policy and Communications, Member Training 2017-18. I'll hand over to Angela Woodhouse.
Thank you, Chairman. This report is really an opportunity to get your views about member training before we bring the full report in July. So in July each year, this committee gets a report which outlines, here's the budget for last year, here's what you spent it on, here's next year's budget, and here's the sort of training we're looking at. We seem to, having looked back at previous reports, we seem to roll out quite similar training each year. And I'd really like to hear your views on what we should be including in the programme. Dare I highlight the fact that I thought maybe committee procedures might be useful. And there's other things like chairing skills we've run in the past that people have really got a lot out of. So it's whether you want some of those courses back. And if I could just speak, because as Councillor Mrs Ring isn't here, she did make a point of coming to see me and say she's really interested in the, it's linked to training, but the information we give to councillors before they even become councillors about what it means to be a councillor, the implications of the role, and also then the induction we give to our new councillors, which is opportune and may need a bit more work by this committee. The good news is, obviously, we're not out for election this year, so we have actually got a bit of time to work on our induction programme if you want to improve it and look at it later in more detail at another meeting. But that come forward from her, and she's not here, so I thought I'd share that with you. But I'm happy to take your views.
Thank you, Angela. I think this is actually quite an important item because we spend a lot of time at various training sessions throughout our term of office, and this is really our opportunity to highlight what we like, what we don't like, what we think is useful and what we don't think is useful, to shape that for not just the induction process but for the whole training sessions that we undertake. So I would encourage you to pipe up if there's any particular issues you wish to raise. Councillor Blackmore.
Sorry, Chairman. I'm fed up with the sound of my own voice. I'm sure everyone else is. Are you actually looking for specific subjects or the way it is dealt with and or both? Both. Okay. I think I'd like to suggest two things. One relates to predetermination, because I think we've got into a little bit of a pickle with predetermination. I just feel there's kind of one set of rules for planning and one set of rules for something else. So I think guidance to members would be really, really helpful. And the second thing is updates re homelessness and also what's coming out from central government and the impact that's going to have on us as a council, which I think would be quite pertinent in the present climate. Thank you.
Noted, Councillor Blackmore. I'll go around the room and then we'll perhaps wrap up some consistent themes. Councillor Joy.
Don't disagree with what's already been said. I wondered whether it might be a good idea to ask group leaders to discuss this very issue at the group meetings so that it can come back, so that all the councillors around the table at once have the opportunity to contribute.
Thank you. Councillor Prendergast.
I think all the speakers have made valid points, Councillor Joy, but I just want to talk as a relatively new member. I think, yes, that's, and over there. There are certain things that I think would really help. New member induction. I've had to fumble my way around Maidstone House to meet personnel. I've never, ever been taken on a tour. I've just learned what floor people sit on, and I found them. So I think that would be really helpful. I still have no idea what we're talking about when we talk about the intranet, because nobody's told me what the intranet is. So things like that would be really, really useful. Regarding point 3.3, I think there are other things that we could bring into the new member induction, such as the committee procedures for councillors, because that's another thing, you know, you find yourself having to sort of pick up on where it would be really good so you could get really involved right from the beginning and participate in issues if you know how the procedures work right from the very beginning. And seeing as our planning committee agendas and strategic planning agendas are often in excess of 200 pages, I really think a speed reading course would be extremely helpful. It would to me, and I know I've inquired about it previously with Democratic Services and I haven't really had any response, so that would be great. I don't think I have much more to add.
I think that point's taken on board, and I certainly agree that would be very helpful. I've got Councillor Lewins next.
Thank you, Chair. I think thanks. Whether we could have the training sessions and so on, workshops notified to us at least a month in advance a lot of people work full-time. And it just gives you more time to prepare yourself. Thank you.
Yeah, I quite agree, and I think that shouldn't be a huge issue. Councillor Ells.
Thank you, Chairman. I think basically everything I was going to say has already been said around the room. I definitely agree with Councillor Prendergast. When we had the induction when I first started, we arrived, I know I was a little rabbit in the headlights a bit, and we were told things like how to call in decisions to full council. It was all a bit too up here. We were still wondering where people sat and where the toilets were at that time. So I think perhaps the way the committees work would be a brilliant system. I actually attended one of the speed reading courses, and that was very good. That was well worth going to as well. Thank you.
Councillor Vizard.
And one of the biggest things I think that we all suffer from, and it's not just the new people coming in, it's us older councillors as well, is when people move on, we don't very often get the information of who has taken the slot, who the officers are, and the contact numbers. That's one of the biggest things that I think, the biggest failings I ever have. I know people have sort of said, and you go around the other councillors and you say, oh, who is in Parks now? That information needs to be brought forward more regularly.
I quite agree, and something like a staff structure which could be circulated every month or so would be very helpful, because I've certainly none the wiser at times as to who to go to, particularly over particular ward matters, rather than perhaps a committee decision as such. Does anyone else have anything further to add? I think we've provided a nice shopping list, yes, really, there, as to items which we'd like considered, which I assume we've got down. Councillor Hinder.
Thank you, Chairman. When I first became a councillor, it was quite a while ago now, we had, do you remember, I think Councillor Joy might remember, we had RADA here. RADA came and we had a mock-up of a committee meeting, so they had the tables laid out. And it was absolutely brilliant. I don't even know whether they still do that. But that was much better than this questioning skills, the effective meeting skills, because you actually were there and you actually felt as though you... Do you remember this, Denise? I'm sure. And it was really, really good. Is it possible we can make some inquiries for that? Because that was very effective. I think it was much more effective than just listening and talking, because we actually acted it, didn't we? It was role-playing. It was very good. It was good fun, yes, it was good fun. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hinder. That's a good point, I think. Before progressing further, and I think we've got everything written down, and we'll try and work it out as best we can. Is there anything that of the existing training feedback that members would like to provide on stuff that they perhaps think hasn't been worthwhile? I know there's stuff that's mentioned at I think 3.2 over what's been done in the past, or are we more or less content with the training sessions that have been put on in the past year? Councillor Prendergast.
Sorry, just something came to, and it might not be relevant to this committee, but the Planning Referrals Committee, whoever they may be, are they not supposed to have full planning training as well? And has that been done?
I've done it all, Shalina.
Oh, well done. Thank you. It's just okay, thanks.
Yeah, the members of the Planning Referrals Committee have to be fully trained in planning, as an ordinary planning committee member would be, though of course they're called on an ad hoc basis as and when needed, and not a regular cycle of meetings. Councillor Joy.
I'm going to talk about in-house training, and it's not any disrespect to any officers that do the training, but I must admit I do get turned off when I'm given papers and then someone stands up there and just reads from a sheet. It can be pretty boring, and I must admit, things like that I don't take in very well. So I'm not being derogative or anything other than to say, can that be discussed at the right level? Thank you.
I think it's a very good point, because we can talk about the topic of the training sessions all we want, but actually how they're presented and how they run is almost just as important. Because certainly from my experience, that it might not be the topics that are the most exciting that you get the most out of the training sessions from. If you've got a good and engaging person taking the session, you're more likely to get the most out of it. That's certainly my own personal experience. I think, look, what we've done is provided, as I said, a nice shopping list to officers. These will all be recorded, and this will then come back to this committee at its meeting on the 3rd of July, in which all of these ideas, it'll be suggested as to how to take them forward. Obviously, as Angela said at the start, in terms of induction, we don't need to worry about that, with the sense that we haven't got a third of the councillors up for election this year, thank goodness, and all the other things are sort of ongoing processes for the forthcoming year. With that in mind, if no one else has got anything further to add, we have a recommendation on page 12 in front of us. Only one recommendation, so I'm happy to propose this from the chair if I have a seconder on the floor. Councillor Lewins, that's fantastic. Can I have a vote of all those in favour of the before I do, Councillor Blackmore, very quickly.
Okay. I just want to point out, it says lead officer and report author, Angela Woodhouse, head of...
I'm very sorry. Head of Policy and Communications, it should read. My apologies, Councillor. I obviously got distracted.
Okay. Can we move to a vote now we've clarified Angela's job title? All those in favour? I think that's unanimous. Super. Members, thank you very much. That was brief. We've kept it under half an hour, which is fantastic. Thank you all very much, and have a good evening.